The gunshot echoed across the dusty valley, sending a flock of startled ravens into the crimson sky. Ruby Matthews pressed her back against the jagged canyon wall, her heart pounding in her chest as she clutched the leather satchel tight against her side. Blood trickled down her arm from where the bullet had grazed her, but there was no time to tend to wounds not with the Blackwell gang closing in. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Ruby had known that intercepting the stagecoach carrying her father's final letter was dangerous, but she hadn't expected Blackwell himself to be aboard. Now she was running for her life, her once fine dress torn and mudded, her copper hair falling loose from its carefully arranged pins. "Find that girl," the distant shout carried on the wind. She can't have gotten far, Ruby swallowed hard, gathering what remained of her strength. Her father's ranch was still 10 miles north, and with night falling, she had little hope of reaching it before Blackwell's men caught up. The letter contained evidence that could clear her father's name, proof that he hadn't stolen the money that had led to his hanging 3 months prior. But that evidence implicated Blackwell, the most feared cattle baron in the territory. She pushed away from the wall, determined to put more distance between herself and her pursuers. As she rounded a bend in the narrow canyon, her ankle twisted on a loose stone, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Pain shot up her leg as she attempted to stand, not broken but badly sprained. Ruby bit back tears of frustration. She would not cry. She had promised her father she would be strong. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent a chill down her spine. Too close. She limped forward, desperately searching for somewhere to hide. The canyon walls offered little cover, just scattered brush and tumbleweeds. The hoofbeats grew louder. Ruby knew she couldn't outrun a horse, especially not with her injured ankle. As the rider appeared around the bend, Ruby frantically scrambled behind a large boulder, pressing herself into the shadows. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she clutched the satchel to her chest. "I know you're here, miss." The voice was deep, unfamiliar. Not Blackwell's raspy drawl or the nasal whine of his right-hand man, Jenkins. "I ain't with them that's chasing you." Ruby remained silent, not trusting the stranger's words. It could be a trick. "Name's Tucker Reid. I was passing through when I heard the shots." The hoofbeats stopped, and she heard the creak of saddle leather as the rider dismounted. "I've no quarrel with you, but those men behind you have a reputation that don't bode well for a lady alone." Through a narrow gap between the boulder and the canyon wall, Ruby could see him now, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. A Winchester rifle rested casually against his shoulder, and the silver star pinned to his vest caught the last rays of sunlight. "You're a lawman," she whispered, still not revealing herself. "Deputy U.S, Marshal," he confirmed. "And unless I miss my guess, those are Blackwell's boys on your trail. That makes you either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps both," Ruby admitted, slowly emerging from her hiding place. She winced as she put weight on her injured ankle. Tucker Reid's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her bloodied arm and disheveled appearance. "You're hurt. It's nothing." Ruby straightened, trying to maintain what dignity she had left. "But I can't outrun them now." The marshal studied her for a moment, then nodded decisively. "My horse can carry two. We'll head for Miller's Creek. I've got friends there." "I need to get to the Matthews ranch," Ruby insisted. Tucker's expression changed. "Matthews, you Robert Matthews' daughter?" "Yes." "And I have proof that my father was innocent." She patted the satchel. "Blackwell framed him for the bank robbery." Tucker glanced back down the canyon, his expression grave. "That evidence won't do anyone any good if Blackwell gets his hands on it or on you." He extended his hand. "Let me help you, Miss Matthews." The sound of distant voices spurred Ruby to action. She took the marshal's offered hand, allowing him to help her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood patiently waiting. With surprising gentleness for such a large man, Tucker lifted her into the saddle before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were off, galloping away from the pursuing gang as the last light faded from the sky. They rode hard through the night, following little-used trails that twisted through the rugged landscape. Ruby found herself leaning back against the Marshal's solid chest, grateful for his warmth as the desert air grew chill. Despite her exhaustion, she couldn't allow herself to sleep, too aware of the strong arms that encircled her as Tucker guided the horse through the darkness. "We'll stop at first light," he told her, his voice close to her ear. "There's a line shack about 10 miles ahead where we can rest for a few hours." Ruby nodded, too tired to speak. Her ankle throbbed painfully, and the graze on her arm had begun to sting in earnest. But she held tightly to the satchel, unwilling to relinquish her father's vindication even for a moment. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the small wooden structure tucked against a hillside. Tucker dismounted first, then reached up to help Ruby down. Her legs buckled as she tried to stand, and he caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "No need to strain that ankle further," he replied, carrying her toward the shack. He kicked the door open with one boot and surveyed the interior before entering. The shack was dusty but intact, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden table, and narrow cot. Tucker set Ruby gently on the cot, then returned outside to tend to his horse. When he came back, he carried his saddlebags and canteen. "Let me see that arm," he said, kneeling beside her. Ruby hesitated, then slowly rolled up her torn sleeve. The bullet had cut a shallow furrow across her upper arm, crusted now with dried blood. Tucker uncorked his canteen and poured water onto a clean bandana. With unexpected tenderness, he cleaned the wound, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "You're lucky," he remarked. "Few more inches to the right and we'd be having a different conversation." "I've never been shot at before," Ruby admitted. Tucker's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Most folks try to keep it that way." He finished bandaging her arm, then moved to examine her ankle. "This needs to be wrapped too. It'll help with the swelling." As he carefully removed her boot and stocking, Ruby studied him properly for the first time. Tucker Reid was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-bronzed skin, and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the harsh western sun. His hair, visible now that he'd removed his hat, was the color of dark honey, and a small scar bisected his left eyebrow. "How did you know to find me in that canyon?" she asked suddenly. Tucker's hands paused in their work. "I didn't. Truth is, I've been tracking Blackwell for months." "The man's responsible for more than just what happened to your father." His jaw tightened. "He's been terrorizing small ranchers across 3 territories, using hired guns to drive them off their land. And you've been after him alone. Where's the rest of your posse?" Tucker resumed wrapping her ankle. "No posse. The territorial governor doesn't want to admit there's a problem, and Blackwell has friends in high places. I'm operating, somewhat unofficially." Ruby's eyes narrowed. "You're not really a marshal, are you?" "The badge is real enough," Tucker replied evenly, "but my orders to pursue Blackwell aren't exactly on the books." He tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels. "You should get some rest, Miss Matthews. We've got a long ride ahead of us." "Ruby," she said, "if we're going to be running for our lives together, you might as well use my given name." That earned her another half-smile. "Ruby, then. I'll keep watch while you sleep." Despite her determination to stay alert, exhaustion claimed Ruby quickly. She drifted off to the sounds of Tucker moving quietly around the shack, securing doors and windows against potential threats. When she woke, the quality of light filtering through the single dirty window told her it was late afternoon. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Tucker was seated at the table, cleaning his revolver with practiced efficiency. He looked up at her movement. "How's the ankle?" Ruby rotated it experimentally. "Better, I think. Still sore, but I can walk on it." "Good. We'll head out at dusk. Less chance of being spotted that way." Ruby swung her legs over the side of the cot, grimacing as she tested her weight on the injured ankle. "I need to know something, Marshal Reid. Once we reach safety, what happens to the evidence against Blackwell?" Tucker reassembled his revolver with quick, practiced movements. That depends on you. If this evidence is as conclusive as you believe, it could be enough to bring him to justice. And clear my father's name, that too, he nodded, though it won't bring him back. Ruby's throat tightened. No. But he died believing the whole territory thought him a thief and a murderer. I can't let that stand. Tucker studied her for a long moment. Your father was a good man. I never believed the charges against him. You knew him. We met a few times. I was new to the territory then, but he helped me when my horse came up lame near his property. Tucker holstered his weapon and stood. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Ruby felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She wouldn't cry in front of this man, this near stranger who had nonetheless risked his life to help her. There's coffee, Tucker said, gesturing to the pot on the small stove. And some jerky in my saddlebags, not much of a meal, but it'll keep your strength up. Ruby nodded gratefully, accepting the change of subject. As she sipped the strong, bitter coffee, she watched Tucker check his ammunition and pack his few belongings. There was a quiet competence to his movements that she found reassuring. How far are we from Miller's Creek? She asked. Another hard day's ride, he replied. My friend there runs the livery stable. He'll help us get word to the territorial judge in Prescott. Not the local sheriff, Tucker's expression darkened. Sheriff Holloway's in Blackwell's pocket. Going to him would be a death sentence. Ruby shivered despite the warmth of the coffee. I knew Blackwell was powerful, but I hadn't realized how far his influence reached. Men like him don't get where they are by playing fair, Tucker said grimly. He's bought or intimidated half the officials in the territory. As the light began to fade, they prepared to leave. Tucker helped Ruby onto his horse, then mounted behind her once more. The closeness was both comforting and disconcerting. Ruby was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. They rode through the night, keeping to less traveled paths. Tucker seemed to know the land intimately, guiding them through narrow passes and shallow creek beds that would hide their tracks. Occasionally, he would halt, listening intently for any sounds of pursuit, but the night remained quiet save for the lonely call of coyotes in the distance. Ruby found herself drifting into a half-doze, lulled by the horse's steady gait and the warmth of the man behind her. She startled awake when Tucker suddenly reined in sharply. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert. "Riders ahead," he murmured, turning the horse off the trail and into a stand of juniper trees. "Stay quiet." They waited, hardly breathing, as a group of horsemen passed on the trail below. In the moonlight, Ruby could make out 5 or 6 riders moving at a brisk pace. One of them she recognized Jenkins, Blackwell's foreman, his distinctive bowlegged silhouette unmistakable even in the dim light. "They're heading toward Miller's Creek," Tucker whispered once the riders had passed. "They must think we'll go there for help. What do we do now?" Tucker was silent for a moment, considering. "Change of plans. We'll head for the old mission at San Miguel instead. It's abandoned now, but it's defensible and few people remember it's there." "How far?" "About 15 miles east of here. We should reach it by morning if we push hard." They set off again, now traveling cross-country rather than following any trail. The terrain grew increasingly rough, forcing them to slow their pace. Ruby's exhaustion returned, compounded by hunger and the persistent ache of her injuries. She fought to stay upright, unwilling to be a burden, but eventually she found herself leaning more heavily against Tucker. "Just a few more miles," he encouraged her, his voice a reassuring rumble against her back. "Hold on a little longer." The first pale light of dawn was breaking when they finally spotted the mission, a crumbling adobe structure set atop a small rise, its bell tower still intact despite years of abandonment. Tucker approached cautiously, circling the building once before dismounting. "Wait here," he instructed, drawing his revolver. Ruby watched anxiously as he disappeared into the shadows of the mission's entrance. Long minutes passed before he reappeared. "It's clear," he called, holstering his weapon. "No one's been here in months from the look of it." Relief flooded through Ruby as Tucker helped her down from the horse. Her legs trembled with fatigue as she tried to stand, and without a word, Tucker scooped her into his arms again, carrying her into the mission. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling of dust and age. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, creating patches of golden light on the earthen floor. Tucker set Ruby down on a stone bench that had once served as a pew, then went back outside to retrieve his saddlebags and tend to his horse. Ruby leaned back against the wall, finally allowing herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion. The satchel was still clutched in her hands, and she loosened her grip slightly, flexing her stiff fingers. Inside was everything she needed to clear her father's name bank records, correspondence, and most damning of all, a ledger in Blackwell's own handwriting detailing the planned robbery and framing of Robert Matthews. She had discovered its existence purely by chance, overhearing a drunken conversation between Jenkins and another of Blackwell's men at the general store in town. They had spoken of the old man's proof still hidden at the bank, and Ruby had realized they meant her father's personal strongbox, which had been confiscated after his arrest. It had taken weeks of planning, but she had finally managed to access it, only to find Blackwell himself arriving as she made her escape. Tucker returned, carrying a small bundle of supplies. "Found an old well out back," he said. "Water's still good. And there are some wild plum trees that look like they'll bear fruit soon." He knelt to build a small fire in what had once been the mission's central hearth, carefully controlling the size to minimize smoke. Soon a pot of coffee was brewing, and Tucker had laid out their meager provisions: jerky, a few biscuits, and some dried apples. "It's not much," he apologized, handing Ruby a tin cup of coffee. "It's more than I expected," she replied honestly. "Thank you, Marshal Tucker," he corrected her. "If we're running for our lives together, you might as well use my given name." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he echoed her earlier words. Ruby found herself smiling despite everything. Tucker, then. They ate in companionable silence, both too hungry and tired for conversation. When they had finished, Tucker insisted on checking Ruby's injuries. The bullet graze was healing well, though her ankle remained swollen. "You should rest," he told her, helping her to a makeshift bed he'd arranged from his bedroll and saddle blanket. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," Ruby protested, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "I'll sleep when you wake," he promised. "I'm used to going without rest when necessary." Too exhausted to argue further, Ruby stretched out on the bedroll. Despite the hardness of the ground beneath her, she fell asleep almost instantly. Her dreams were troubled images of her father's hanging, Blackwell's sneering face, and the endless pursuit across the desert landscape. She woke with a start, disoriented momentarily until she remembered where she was. The quality of light had changed. It was late afternoon now. Tucker sat nearby, his back against the wall, his Winchester across his knees. His eyes were closed. Ruby shifted slightly, and his eyes snapped open immediately, alert and focused. He relaxed when he saw her. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, sitting up. "About 8 hours," he replied. "You needed it." "And you need rest too," she insisted. "I can keep watch now." Tucker looked as if he might argue, but then nodded, handing her the Winchester. "Wake me if you hear anything at all." "I will," she promised. As Tucker settled onto the bedroll she had vacated, Ruby positioned herself near one of the mission's narrow windows, where she could see the approach from the west. The Winchester was heavy in her hands, but not unfamiliar. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 13, believing that every woman in the territories should know how to defend herself. The afternoon passed slowly. Ruby watched as shadows lengthened across the landscape, turning the scrubby desert vegetation into dark silhouettes against the reddening sky. She thought of her home, wondering if she would ever see it again. After her father's death, she had managed to keep the ranch running with the help of the few loyal hands who remained, but it had been a struggle. Many of the neighboring ranchers, fearful of Blackwell's influence, had distanced themselves from the Matthews name. Now, With the evidence in her possession, perhaps she could reclaim not just her father's reputation, but the respect and position the Matthews Ranch had once held in the community. If she survived long enough to present it to the judge in Prescott. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid streaks of orange and purple, Ruby's thoughts turned to the man sleeping a few feet away. Tucker Reid was unlike any lawman she had encountered before. There was a quiet intensity about him, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere duty. And there was kindness, too, evident in the gentle way he had tended her injuries and his concern for her comfort, despite their dire circumstances. Ruby was startled from her reverie by a sound, the distant but unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats. She tensed, gripping the Winchester tighter as she peered into the gathering darkness. "Tucker," she called softly, moving to wake him. "Riders coming." He was on his feet in an instant, fully alert despite his brief rest. He joined her at the window, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "How many?" he asked. "I can't tell yet, but they're coming from the west." Tucker's expression hardened. "That's the direction Blackwell's men went. They must have realized we didn't head for Miller's Creek and doubled back. How would they know to look here?" "They might not be looking specifically for this place," Tucker reasoned. "But they know I'm helping you and they know my history in the territory. They're probably checking every possible hideout." He moved quickly, gathering their few belongings. "We need to move. There's a back way out through the sacristy. My horse is hidden in the arroyo behind the mission." Ruby shoved the remaining provisions into Tucker's saddlebags while he checked his weapons. The hoofbeats were growing louder. "They're coming fast," she said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Tucker nodded grimly. "Too fast for us to outrun on one horse, especially with your ankle." He seemed to come to a decision. "I'll lead them away. You stay here, hidden in the old bell tower. Once they've gone, make your way east to the Gonzales Ranch. Maria Gonzales will help you." "No." Ruby protested. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. I'm not planning on sacrificing anything," Tucker replied with a tight smile. "Just giving them something to chase while you get clear." "It's too dangerous," Ruby insisted. "There must be another way." The hoofbeats were very close now. Through the window, Ruby could make out the shapes of at least 4 riders approaching rapidly. "No time to argue," Tucker said firmly. He took her by the shoulders, his eyes intense. "Promise me you'll stay hidden until they're gone. Then get to the Gonzales place." Ruby wanted to refuse, to insist on staying together, but she knew he was right. On one horse, with her injured, they couldn't outrun Blackwell's men. She nodded reluctantly. "I promise." Tucker squeezed her shoulders gently, then released her. "The bell tower." "Go now." Ruby clutched the satchel and hurried toward the narrow staircase that led to the tower. She paused at the bottom, looking back at Tucker as he checked his revolver one last time. "Be careful," she whispered. He glanced up, meeting her eyes. "I'll find you," he promised, "when it's safe." Then he was gone, slipping out through the back of the mission. Ruby forced herself to climb the stairs, ignoring the pain in her ankle. The bell tower was little more than a platform now, the bell itself long gone, but it offered a good vantage point and relative concealment. She crouched low, peering through a narrow opening in the adobe wall. From this height, she could see Tucker emerging from behind the mission, mounting his horse with fluid grace. He set off at a gallop, heading north across the open desert. As she had feared, the approaching riders spotted him immediately, changing course to pursue. Ruby watched, heart in her throat, as Tucker led them away from the mission, drawing them farther and farther into the desert. When they had disappeared from sight, swallowed by the growing darkness, she allowed herself to breathe again, but her relief was short-lived. A sound from below made her freeze, the creak of the mission's wooden door. Someone was inside. Ruby pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. Heavy footsteps crossed the earthen floor below, accompanied by the jingle of spurs. "Looks like they were here," a voice called. "Fire's still warm. Check the back," another voice responded. "Morgan, you take the tower." Ruby's heart hammered in her chest. She was trapped with nowhere to run. The Winchester lay across her knees, but she doubted she could take on multiple armed men, even with the advantage of higher ground. The footsteps approached the staircase. Ruby raised the rifle, aiming at the opening where the man would appear. Her hands were steady despite her fear. If she was going to die, she would not do so without a fight. The footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Tower's clear," the man called after a moment. "No one up there." Ruby blinked in confusion. She was right here in plain sight of anyone coming up the stairs. "You sure?" the other voice asked. "Yeah, stairs are covered in dust. No one's been up there in ages." The footsteps retreated. Ruby remained frozen, scarcely believing her luck. After several minutes, she heard the men leave the mission, their horses galloping away in the direction Tucker had gone. Only when the sound had faded completely did Ruby move, creeping down the stairs with the Winchester ready. The mission was empty, just as the men had said. She examined the staircase and saw what had saved her. The stairs were indeed thick with dust, but somehow her ascent had not disturbed it enough to be noticeable in the dim light. Relief made her knees weak, but she couldn't afford to linger. Tucker had told her to head for the Gonzales Ranch once the coast was clear. It would be a difficult journey on foot with her injured ankle, but she had no choice. Gathering what supplies she could carry, Ruby slipped out of the mission into the cool desert night. The stars were emerging, providing just enough light to navigate by. East, Tucker had said. The Gonzales Ranch lay east. With the satchel secure against her side and the Winchester in her hands, Ruby Matthews set off across the desert, alone once more. The night was eerily quiet as Ruby made her way eastward, guided only by the stars overhead. Her progress was painfully slow, her injured ankle protesting with each step. Several times she had to stop and rest, leaning against a boulder or sitting beneath a scraggly mesquite tree while she caught her breath. Her thoughts continually returned to Tucker. Had he managed to evade Blackwell's men, or had they caught up to him, 4 against 1? The image of him lying wounded or worse in the desert darkness was almost unbearable. "He'll be fine," she muttered to herself. "He knows what he's doing." But the reassurance rang hollow in the vast emptiness surrounding her. By dawn, Ruby estimated she had covered perhaps 5 miles, not even half the distance to the Gonzales Ranch. The rising sun brought with it the promise of punishing heat, and Ruby knew she needed to find shelter before the full force of the day descended. A cluster of rocks ahead offered some promise of shade. As she approached, Ruby noticed a narrow crevice between 2 large boulders, just wide enough for a person to slip through. Inside, the space opened up slightly, forming a natural alcove sheltered from both sun and view. Ruby settled into this makeshift sanctuary, sipping sparingly from the canteen Tucker had insisted she take. Her throat was parched, her lips beginning to crack from dehydration. She would need to ration the water carefully if she hoped to reach the Gonzales Ranch. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature within the alcove rose, though it remained bearable compared to the exposed desert. Ruby dozed fitfully, her dreams punctuated by images of pursuit and danger. When she woke, the angle of the shadows told her it was late afternoon. Soon it would be cool enough to continue her journey. She was preparing to leave when she heard the unmistakable sound of horses approaching. Ruby froze, listening intently. Not a large group, perhaps only 1 or 2 riders, moving slowly as if searching for something or someone. Ruby pressed herself deeper into the alcove, Winchester ready. Through the narrow opening, she could see a lone rider approaching, his horse moving at a walk. The man was slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side. Her heart leaped as she recognized the rider. Tucker. She gasped, scrambling out from her hiding place. He jerked upright at her voice, his hand moving to his holster before recognition dawned. "Ruby." His voice was strained, disbelieving. "I'm here," she called, limping toward him as quickly as her ankle would allow. As she drew closer, she saw the dark stain spreading across his shirt. "You're hurt." Tucker swayed slightly in the saddle. "Caught a bullet," he admitted. "Managed to lose them, but—" He trailed off, his face pale beneath its tan. Ruby reached up to help him dismount, alarmed at how heavily he leaned on her. "Come on," she urged, guiding him toward the shelter of the rocks. "You need to lie down." Once in the alcove, she helped him stretch out on the sandy ground. With trembling hands, she unbuttoned his shirt to reveal the wound and angry furrow across his ribs, still seeping blood. "Not as bad as it looks," Tucker assured her, though his grimace belied his words. "Bullet just grazed me, lost some blood is all." Ruby tore a strip from her petticoat to create a bandage. "How did you find me?" she asked as she worked. "Tracked you," he replied, his breath hitching as she cleaned the wound with water from the canteen. "Saw your trail heading east and figured you were following my instructions for once." Despite everything, Ruby felt a smile tug at her lips. "I do occasionally listen to reason, Marshal." Tucker managed a weak chuckle that turned into a wince. "Could have fooled me." Ruby finished bandaging his side, then helped him drink from the canteen. His color was poor, his skin clammy to the touch. He needed proper medical attention, not her amateur ministrations in a desert hideout. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said worriedly. Tucker shook his head. "Gonzalez Place first, it's safer." He reached out, catching her hand in his. "I'm sorry, Ruby. I led them away, but they were persistent, split up to search for us." "You have nothing to apologize for," she insisted. "You saved my life." His fingers tightened around hers. "And you've apparently returned the favor. I don't think I'd have made it much farther on my own." The admission of vulnerability from this strong, capable man stirred something in Ruby's chest. She squeezed his hand gently. "Rest now. We'll move on when you're stronger." Tucker's eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. Ruby watched as his breathing evened out, shallow but steady. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger, less burdened by whatever ghosts drove him to pursue men like Blackwell. Ruby settled beside him, the Winchester across her lap as she prepared to keep watch. They were still in danger, still hunted, but somehow, finding each other again in the vastness of the desert felt like a sign that perhaps luck was finally turning in their favor. The hours passed slowly. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, the desert surrendering its heat to the star-filled sky. Ruby moved closer to Tucker, sharing her body warmth as he shivered slightly in his sleep. His fever worried her infection setting in already, perhaps. Around midnight, Tucker stirred, his eyes opening with the instant alertness she was coming to recognize. "How long was I out?" he asked, his voice rough. "About 6 hours," Ruby replied. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a mule," he admitted, attempting to sit up. Ruby helped him, supporting his back as he leaned against the rock wall. "But I'll live." "Your wound is showing signs of infection," she told him honestly. "You need medicine, proper care." Tucker nodded grimly. "All the more reason to reach the Gonzalez place. Maria has some skill with healing." He looked at her closely. "You should have gone on without me." "That was never an option," Ruby said firmly. Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. "Stubborn woman," he murmured, but there was warmth in his tone. "You're not the first to notice," Ruby replied with a small smile. Her father had often said the same, half exasperated and half proud of her determination. Tucker's expression sobered. "Blackwell's men will still be searching. They won't give up easily, not with what's at stake." "My father's evidence," Ruby nodded. "It proves Blackwell orchestrated the robbery, murdered the teller, and framed my father for both crimes." "It's more than that," Tucker said. "Your father had been gathering evidence against Blackwell for months, documentation of land grabs, cattle rustling, even murders disguised as accidents. He was building a case to take to the federal authorities." Ruby stared at him. "How do you know this?" Tucker hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Because I was helping him. Your father and I were working together to bring Blackwell to justice." "What?" Ruby felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. "But you said you barely knew him." "I lied," Tucker admitted. "I couldn't be sure how much you knew, or whether I could trust you with the truth." His eyes held hers steadily. "Your father was a brave man, Ruby. When he discovered what Blackwell was doing, he reached out to me through channels in the Marshal's service. We spent months gathering evidence, building a case that even Blackwell's political connections couldn't dismiss. Then why didn't you save him? Ruby demanded, old grief surging anew. Why did you let them hang him? Pain crossed Tucker's face, not physical this time, but something deeper. I tried. I was in Santa Fe when word came of his arrest. By the time I reached Prescott, the trial was already over. Blackwell had pushed for an immediate hearing, using his influence with Judge Carlson. Your father was convicted and sentenced within days. You could have stopped the execution, Ruby insisted, tears threatening. I arrived the morning of the hanging, Tucker said quietly. Too late to do anything but watch as they put the noose around his neck. Your father saw me in the crowd. He gave the slightest shake of his head, warning me not to intervene. He knew if I revealed myself, Blackwell would have killed me too, and all our work would have been for nothing. Ruby turned away, unable to bear the raw emotion in Tucker's eyes. Her father had died protecting this man, ensuring their investigation could continue. It was exactly the kind of selfless act Robert Matthews would have considered necessary, but the knowledge brought Ruby little comfort. The evidence in that satchel, Tucker continued after a moment, combined with what I've gathered since your father's death, is enough to destroy Blackwell completely. That's why he's so desperate to find you to find us. Ruby wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her resolve. Then we need to make sure he doesn't succeed. She straightened her shoulders, pushing aside grief in favor of determination. Can you ride? Tucker nodded. Not far and not fast, but enough to reach the Gonzales ranch if we're careful. Then we should go now while it's still dark. They prepared to leave, Ruby helping Tucker to his feet and supporting him as they made their way back to his horse. The animal nickered softly in recognition, nuzzling Tucker's shoulder. Good boy, Samson, Tucker murmured, patting the horse's neck. Need you to be strong a little longer. With Ruby's help, Tucker managed to mount, though the effort left him pale and sweating. Ruby climbed up behind him, taking the reins as Tucker leaned back against her, conserving his strength. They set off at a slow walk, heading east once more. The night was clear, a half moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Ruby kept Samson to the softer ground where possible, avoiding rocky areas that might leave trackable hoof prints. They rode in silence for the most part, Tucker occasionally directing her when the way was unclear. Ruby could feel the heat of his fever through his shirt, and his breathing grew more labored as the hours passed. She feared he might lose consciousness again, but Tucker remained stubbornly awake, his determination evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. Dawn was breaking when they finally spotted the Gonzales Ranch, a modest adobe house with several outbuildings, nestled in a small valley where an underground spring provided precious water for crops and livestock. A thin spiral of smoke rose from the chimney, indicating the household was already awake. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a woman with a rifle in her hands, watching their approach with obvious wariness. Maria, Tucker called, his voice weaker than Ruby would have liked. It's Tucker Reid. The woman lowered her rifle slightly but didn't set it aside. As they drew closer, Ruby could see she was perhaps 50, with streaks of silver in her dark hair and deep lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Dios mio, Tucker, Maria exclaimed as she took in his condition. What trouble have you brought to my door this time? The usual kind, Tucker replied with a strained attempt at humor. This is Ruby Matthews, Robert's daughter. Maria's expression softened immediately. Robert's girl. I should have seen the resemblance. She set aside her rifle and hurried forward to help Ruby ease Tucker from the saddle. Come, bring him inside, quickly now. Between them, they managed to get Tucker into the house and onto a narrow bed in a small side room. Maria immediately set to work, cutting away the makeshift bandage to examine the wound. Infected, as I feared, she muttered. Fetch me hot water, she instructed Ruby, and the blue jar from the kitchen shelf. Ruby hurried to comply, finding a pot already warming on the kitchen stove and the jar exactly where Maria had described. When she returned, Maria was gently cleaning the wound, her movements practiced and efficient. "Will he be all right?" Ruby asked anxiously. Maria glanced up, her dark eyes assessing. "If the fever breaks soon, yes. The wound itself is not so bad, a clean furrow across the ribs, but infection is the real enemy out here." She opened the blue jar, which contained a pungent-smelling salve. "This will help draw out the poison." As Maria worked, Ruby explained their situation, the evidence against Blackwell, the pursuit, their narrow escapes. Maria listened without interruption, her hands never pausing in their careful ministrations. Only when she had finished dressing Tucker's wound and given him a tea made from herbs that she promised would help with the fever did she speak. "James Blackwell has been a curse on this territory for too long," she said grimly. "My husband stood against him 10 years ago when he tried to divert our water supply. 2 weeks later, Eduardo was found dead, a hunting accident, they called it." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "My Eduardo had not hunted a day in his life." "I'm sorry," Ruby said softly. Maria straightened, her spine stiff with old pride and older grief. Many families have similar stories. Blackwell takes what he wants and destroys those who oppose him. If you truly have evidence that can bring him to justice, I will help you however I can." "Thank you," Ruby said sincerely. "But I fear we've put you in danger by coming here," Maria shrugged. "Danger is an old companion of mine. Now you should rest too. You look exhausted, child." Ruby couldn't deny her fatigue, but her concern for Tucker kept her rooted by his bedside. "I'll stay with him a while longer." Maria's expression softened. "As you wish, I will prepare some food. You must keep up your strength." When Maria had left, Ruby pulled a chair closer to Tucker's bed. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. Without thinking, she reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. At her touch, Tucker's eyes fluttered open. "Ruby," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm here," she assured him. "We made it to the Gonzales ranch. You're safe now." Tucker's hand moved weakly, seeking hers. Ruby took it, alarmed at the heat of his skin. "The evidence," he whispered urgently. "If something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you," Ruby interrupted firmly. "You're going to recover, and we're going to bring Blackwell to justice together." A ghost of a smile touched Tucker's lips. "Stubborn," he murmured again, before his eyes drifted closed once more. Ruby held his hand as he slipped back into feverish sleep, her heart constricting with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. This man had been her father's ally, had risked his life repeatedly to help her, and now lay fighting infection because of his determination to see justice done. She barely knew him, yet she felt connected to him in a way that defied rational explanation. "Don't you dare die on me, Tucker Reid," she whispered fiercely. "I won't allow it." Outside, a rooster crowed, heralding the full arrival of morning. A new day, bringing with it both danger and hope in equal measure. For 3 days, Tucker's fever raged. Ruby rarely left his side, helping Maria change the dressings on his wound, spooning broth between his cracked lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and bathing his burning skin with cool water when the fever threatened to consume him entirely. During his delirium, Tucker called out names Ruby didn't recognize, comrades perhaps, or family members long gone. Sometimes he murmured about Blackwell, his agitation visible even in unconsciousness. And once, heart-stoppingly, he called Ruby's name with such raw emotion that she froze in the act of wiping his brow, her breath catching in her throat. Maria, entering with fresh bandages, had given Ruby a knowing look but said nothing. On the morning of the 4th day, Ruby woke from an uncomfortable doze in the bedside chair to find Tucker watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since their arrival. "Good morning," he said, his voice weak but steady. Relief washed over Ruby like a flash flood. "You're awake," she said unnecessarily, leaning forward to feel his forehead. The fever had broken sometime in the night. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Tucker admitted with a wry smile. but considerably more alive than I expected to be. His eyes held hers. Thanks to you, Ruby shook her head. Maria did the real healing, I just helped. You got me here, Tucker insisted. You could have saved yourself, headed straight for Prescott with the evidence. Instead, you risked everything to help me. You would have done the same for me, Ruby replied simply. In fact, you did. A moment of understanding passed between them, profound in its simplicity. Then Maria bustled in, exclaiming with delight at Tucker's improvement and shooing Ruby away to get some proper rest. You'll be no use to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion, the older woman scolded gently. Go, sleep. I will look after our patient now. Too tired to argue, Ruby retreated to the small room Maria had given her, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep the moment her head touched the pillow. When she woke, the angle of light through the window told her it was late afternoon. Ruby washed and changed into clean clothes. Maria had provided a simple cotton dress that was slightly too large but infinitely preferable to her own torn and soiled garments. She found Tucker sitting up in bed, color returned to his face as he ate a bowl of Maria's hearty stew. He looked up as she entered, his eyes warming. There you are. Maria said you were finally getting some proper rest. I could say the same for you, Ruby replied, pleased to see the improvement in his condition. You look better, feel better, Tucker confirmed, though Maria refuses to let me get out of bed yet. He nodded toward a chair by the window. Join me, there's something we need to discuss. Ruby sat, noting the serious turn of his expression. What is it? Tucker set aside his empty bowl. Maria's son Ramon returned from town an hour ago. Blackwell's men are everywhere, questioning people, searching buildings. They're offering a substantial reward for information about us. Ruby's stomach tightened with familiar fear. They know we're in the area, they suspect, Tucker corrected, but they haven't focused on this ranch yet. Ramon says there's a rumor we were spotted heading north toward the territorial border. A false trail, Tucker nodded. Likely spread by someone sympathetic to our cause, but it won't distract them forever. We need to move on as soon as possible. You're in no condition to travel, Ruby protested. In another day or two I will be, Tucker insisted, and we can't stay here much longer. It puts Maria and her family at too much risk. Ruby couldn't argue with that logic, much as she wanted to. Where will we go? Prescott is at least 3 days' ride, and Blackwell's influence is strongest there. Not Prescott, Tucker said, at least not directly. I have a contact in Jerome, a telegraph operator who can send a secure message to Judge Harrington in Tucson. He's a federal judge beyond Blackwell's influence, and he's been looking for a way to bring Blackwell down for years. And once the judge receives our evidence, he'll issue federal warrants and send U.S. Marshals to arrest Blackwell and his associates, Tucker explained. The territorial authorities won't be able to interfere. It seemed like a solid plan, but Ruby had learned to be cautious. How far is Jerome from here? About 50 miles southwest, Tucker replied. 2 days hard riding under normal circumstances. And with you injured? Tucker's mouth quirked in a half-smile. 3 days, maybe 4. We'll need to be careful, stick to less traveled routes. Ruby nodded slowly. When do we leave? Day after tomorrow at dawn, Tucker decided. I need another day to regain some strength. As if to prove his point, he attempted to rise from the bed, moving carefully to test his injured side. Ruby hurried to assist him, supporting his arm as he stood. He was unsteady at first, but after a moment he straightened, determination evident in the set of his jaw. See, already improving, he said, though Ruby noted the sheen of sweat on his forehead from even this small exertion. Don't push yourself too hard, she cautioned. We need you at your best. Tucker looked down at her, suddenly aware of their proximity. Ruby felt her pulse quicken as his eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. I'll be ready, he promised softly. The moment was interrupted by Maria, who entered with fresh bandages and immediately began scolding Tucker for being out of bed. Ruby stepped back, allowing the older woman to help Tucker sit down again, but the warmth of his gaze lingered like a physical touch. The next day passed in preparation for their journey. Maria's son Ramon rode to a neighboring ranch to borrow a second horse for Ruby, while Maria herself prepared provisions and medicinal supplies. Tucker regained strength rapidly, able to move around the house with increasing ease, though Ruby noticed he still guarded his injured side carefully. By evening, all was ready for their departure at first light. After a hearty dinner, during which Ramon shared the latest news from town, Blackwell was offering an even larger reward now, and had brought in additional men to search the territory. They retired early, each aware of the challenges that lay ahead. Ruby found sleep elusive, her mind too full of the dangers they would face. After an hour of restless tossing, she rose and slipped outside, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the desert night. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Ruby wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter around her shoulders as she wandered toward a small rise behind the house, where a gnarled old mesquite tree stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky. She was surprised to find Tucker already there, leaning against the tree trunk, his face lifted to the heavens. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, approaching. Tucker turned, unsurprised by her presence. "Too much on my mind," he admitted, "and you, the same." Ruby joined him beneath the tree, her shoulder nearly touching his as they both gazed upward. "It's beautiful out here." "It is," Tucker agreed. "Your father loved nights like this, said you could see the hand of God in the stars." Ruby smiled at the memory. "He used to take me stargazing when I was a child, taught me all the constellations." She pointed upward. "There's Cygnus the swan, and there Aquila the eagle." Tucker followed her gesture. "Your father taught you well." "He taught me many things," Ruby said softly. "How to ride, how to shoot, how to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult." She glanced at Tucker. "He would have been grateful for what you're doing." "I'm only finishing what he started," Tucker replied. After a moment he added, "I never told you how we met." "No, you didn't." Tucker shifted, turning to face her more fully. "It was about 2 years ago. I was investigating a series of land grabs near the Colorado border, ranchers being forced out, similar to what Blackwell's been doing here. Your father reached out to me after hearing of my investigation from a friend in the Marshal's service. He'd been documenting similar patterns in this region and suspected they were connected." "And they were," Ruby prompted when Tucker paused. "Yes, though not directly. Blackwell wasn't working with the outfit I was investigating, but they were using the same methods, the same legal loopholes. Your father's documentation helped me build a stronger case." Tucker's expression grew distant with memory. "When I came to thank him, we got to talking. He showed me evidence he'd been gathering against Blackwell land deeds with forged signatures, witness testimonies about threats and intimidation." "Why didn't he take it to the authorities himself?" Ruby asked. "He tried," Tucker said grimly. "But Blackwell had too many friends in local government. No one would touch the case." He shook his head. "Your father was a brave man, Ruby. He knew the risks he was taking, but he couldn't stand by and watch Blackwell destroy more lives." "That sounds like him," Ruby said, her throat tight with emotion. "He always said that evil flourishes when good men do nothing." Tucker nodded. "A philosophy I share." He hesitated, then added quietly, "It's why I can't walk away from this even now. Too many people have suffered because of Blackwell, too many have died." "Including my father," Ruby murmured. "Yes," Tucker's voice was solemn. "I made a promise, Ruby, to your father and to myself. I intend to keep it." Ruby studied his face in the moonlight, seeing the determination etched there, the unwavering sense of purpose that seemed to define him. "We'll keep it together," she said firmly. Tucker's expression softened as he looked at her. "You're very much like him, you know. Same courage, same conviction." "I'll take that as the highest compliment," Ruby replied. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft calling of a night bird in the distance. Ruby was acutely aware of Tucker's presence beside her, the solid strength of him, the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to his skin. "We should try to rest," Tucker said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "Dawn will come quickly." Yes, Ruby agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. We should. Neither moved. Then, slowly, Tucker reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from Ruby's face. The touch was feather-light, but it sent warmth spreading through her veins. "Ruby," he said, her name almost a question on his lips. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the stillness of the night. Tucker stiffened, instantly alert. "Someone's coming," he said, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get back to the house." "Wake Maria and Ramon." Ruby hesitated, unwilling to leave him alone. "Go," Tucker urged more forcefully. "I'll be right behind you." Reluctantly, Ruby hurried back down the slope toward the house. Behind her, she heard Tucker moving into the shadow of a large boulder, positioning himself to observe the approaching rider without being seen. Maria was already awake when Ruby entered the house, a rifle in her hands. "I heard," the older woman said grimly. "Ramon is checking the back of the property." "Tucker's watching from the rise," Ruby told her, reaching for the Winchester that stood by the door. Just one rider from the sound of it. They waited in tense silence. After what seemed an eternity, there was a soft knock at the door, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Maria relaxed slightly. "That's Tucker's signal," she explained, moving to open the door. Tucker entered, followed by a man Ruby didn't recognize, middle-aged, with a gray-streaked beard and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "This is Tom Reeves," Tucker introduced him. "He's a friend, works as a scout for the Army sometimes. And brings news when needed," Tom added, nodding respectfully to the women. "Bad news, I'm afraid." Maria fetched coffee while Tom delivered his information. Blackwell had somehow learned that Tucker and Ruby had received help in the area. His men were systematically searching every ranch and homestead within 20 miles. "They'll be here by noon tomorrow," Tom concluded grimly. "Maybe sooner." Tucker's expression hardened. "Then we leave tonight." "Tucker, you're not strong enough," Ruby protested. "I'm strong enough for this," he insisted. "We don't have a choice." Maria nodded in reluctant agreement. "He's right, you cannot be here when Blackwell's men arrive." "What about you?" Ruby asked anxiously. "They'll know you helped us." "They can suspect, but they cannot prove," Maria replied with dignity. "And I have friends too. Ramon has already gone to alert the neighbors. By morning there will be 6 or 7 men here, all claiming to have been at a card game all night." She smiled grimly. "Even Blackwell cannot arrest an entire community." Preparations moved quickly after that. Within an hour they were ready to depart, 2 horses saddled, provisions packed, weapons checked and loaded. Tom would ride with them for the first few miles, helping them navigate the difficult terrain in darkness before returning to support Maria's alibi. The farewells were brief but heartfelt. Maria embraced Ruby tightly. "Go with God, child," she whispered, "and take care of him." She glanced meaningfully at Tucker. "He is stronger than he appears, but even the strongest men have limits." "I will," Ruby promised. Tucker mounted his horse with only a slight wince, evidence of his improving condition. Ruby settled onto her own mount, a sturdy paint mare that Ramon had procured from a neighboring ranch. As they rode away from the safety of the Gonzalez home, Ruby felt a familiar knot of fear in her stomach. But alongside, it was something new, a sense of purpose, of determination. They were no longer simply running, they were moving toward something, toward justice. Tucker rode beside her, his silhouette straight and resolute against the star-filled sky. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The night journey was arduous, their path taking them through rocky terrain where even Tom Reeves, with his extensive knowledge of the land, had to proceed cautiously. They rode in silence for the most part, conserving energy and maintaining vigilance against potential threats. After several hours, they reached a shallow river crossing where Tom would leave them. "Follow this river south for about 5 miles, he instructed. "Then head west into the foothills. There's an old trapper's cabin in a small canyon. You can rest there during the day. It's well hidden and few people remember it exists." Tucker clasped the scout's hand gratefully. "Thank you, Tom, for everything." "Just make sure Blackwell pays for what he's done," Tom replied grimly. "Too many good people have suffered because of that man." With a final nod to Ruby, Tom turned his horse and rode back the way they had come, soon disappearing into the darkness. Tucker and Ruby continued on, following the river as instructed. The water gurgled softly beside them, its surface occasionally catching the starlight in brief, silvery flashes. Despite the circumstances, Ruby found a strange peace in the rhythm of their journey, the steady plod of hooves, the gentle creaking of saddle leather, the vast canopy of stars overhead. "How are you holding up?" Tucker asked after a while, his voice low. "I'm fine," Ruby assured him. "More worried about you. Your wound is healing," Tucker finished for her. "Maria's salve worked wonders." He adjusted his position slightly in the saddle. "Truth be told, I'm more concerned about you. This isn't the life you're accustomed to, running, hiding, constant danger." Ruby considered this. It was true that before her father's death, her life had been relatively sheltered. As the daughter of a respected rancher, she had enjoyed certain privileges and protections that most women in the territories could only dream of. But the past 3 months had changed her irrevocably. "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but I'm stronger than I appear." She deliberately echoed Maria's words about Tucker, earning a soft chuckle from him. "That you are," he agreed. "Your father would be proud." They fell into companionable silence once more. After they had traveled the distance Tom had specified, Tucker led them westward into increasingly rugged terrain. The going was slower here, the horses picking their way carefully over rocky ground. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the canyon Tom had described, a narrow cleft in the foothills, its entrance nearly hidden by a stand of juniper trees. The trapper's cabin was little more than a crude shelter made of logs and stone, but it offered concealment and a defensible position if needed. Inside, they found a single room with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a narrow pallet in one corner. Years of dust and abandonment had left their mark, but the structure itself was sound. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Tucker remarked wryly as they unloaded their provisions. "I've seen worse," Ruby replied, thinking of the mission where they had hidden before. "At least this has a roof." They settled in quickly, establishing a routine with the ease of those accustomed to each other's movements. Tucker tended to the horses, concealing them in a small copse behind the cabin, while Ruby cleared the worst of the dust from the interior and arranged their belongings. By unspoken agreement, they avoided lighting a fire despite the morning chill. Smoke would be visible for miles in the clear desert air, potentially revealing their location to searching eyes. Instead, they made a cold breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits from their provisions, washing it down with water from their canteens. After eating, Tucker insisted on checking their weapons and ammunition, his expression grave. "We're still a good 2 days' ride from Jerome," he said as he cleaned his revolver with practiced movements. "Blackwell's men will be searching every possible route." "Do you think they know we're heading for Jerome specifically?" Ruby asked. Tucker considered this. "Probably not. But they know I'm a marshal and they'll guess I'm trying to reach someone with federal authority. There aren't many options in this part of the territory." Ruby nodded, understanding the implication, "So we'll have to be extremely careful." "Yes," Tucker agreed. "We'll travel only at night, keep to the most difficult terrain where they are less likely to follow." He glanced at her. "It won't be easy." "None of this has been easy," Ruby replied simply, "but it's necessary." Tucker's expression softened. "Get some rest while you can, I'll take first watch." Ruby wanted to argue, to insist that he needed rest more than she did given his injury, but the stubborn set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she stretched out on the narrow pallet, her body suddenly aware of every ache and strain from the long night's ride. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Ruby was acutely conscious of Tucker sitting by the cabin's single window, his profile outlined against the growing light. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe despite the danger that surrounded them. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a confused tangle of memories and fears: her father's face on the gallows, Blackwell's men in pursuit, Tucker lying wounded in the desert. She woke with a start to find the cabin filled with the golden light of late afternoon and Tucker gently shaking her shoulder. "Ruby," he said softly, "it's time to change watches. You need to be alert for the night journey." Ruby sat up, disoriented momentarily. "How long did I sleep?" "About 8 hours, Tucker replied. "You needed it." She noted the fatigue evident in his face, the shadows beneath his eyes. "And you need rest now," she insisted. "I'll keep watch." This time, Tucker didn't argue. He checked his revolver one last time before handing it to her. "Wake me if you hear anything at all." "I will," she promised. Tucker stretched out on the pallet Ruby had vacated, grimacing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing wound. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, the lines of worry temporarily smoothed from his face. Ruby took up position by the window, Winchester across her knees as she scanned the surrounding terrain. The canyon was quiet, disturbed only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead or the rustle of wind through the juniper trees. As she kept her vigil, Ruby's thoughts returned to the moment beneath the mesquite tree at the Gonzales Ranch, Tucker's fingers brushing her hair, the way he had said her name. Before their interrupted departure, something had been building between them, something she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. Her feelings for Tucker Reid were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. In the span of a few short days, he had transformed from a stranger into what? Not quite a friend. The connection between them seemed deeper than mere friendship. But was it simply gratitude for his help, admiration for his courage, or something more profound? Ruby sighed softly, knowing this was hardly the time for such contemplations. They were fighting for their lives, for justice. Personal feelings had no place in their current circumstances. And yet, as her gaze drifted to Tucker's sleeping form, Ruby couldn't help but wonder what might happen once this was over, if they survived, if they succeeded in bringing Blackwell to justice. Would Tucker simply return to his duties as a marshal, moving on to the next case, the next criminal? Would their paths ever cross again? The thought of parting ways with him created an unexpected ache in her chest. Ruby forced her attention back to the window, reminding herself of her responsibility. Sentimentality would not keep them safe. Vigilance would. The hours passed slowly. As evening approached, Ruby noticed a change in the weather, dark clouds gathering on the western horizon, promising rain. In the desert, storms could be both blessing and curse, providing much-needed water but also creating flash floods in canyons like the one they currently occupied. When Tucker woke as dusk was falling, Ruby pointed out the approaching storm. "Might work in our favor," he observed, studying the clouds. "Rain will make tracking difficult, but we'll need to be cautious of washes and low areas." They prepared to depart, packing their few belongings and checking the horses. The animals were rested and seemed eager to move, sensing perhaps the electrical charge in the air that preceded the storm. Just as they were about to leave, Tucker paused, his hand on the cabin door. "Ruby," he said, his voice unusually hesitant, "before we go, there's something I need to say." Ruby felt her heart quicken. "Yes." Tucker turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "The past few days, they've been the most dangerous of my life, but also—" He paused, searching for words. "I want you to know that whatever happens, meeting you has been." A distant sound interrupted him, the unmistakable report of a rifle echoing through the canyon. Tucker's expression hardened instantly. "They've found us," he said grimly, drawing his revolver. "Or they're close enough to be a threat." Ruby felt a flash of frustration at the interrupted moment, quickly replaced by the now familiar surge of fear and determination. "How could they have tracked us here?" "Doesn't matter now," Tucker replied, moving to the window to assess the situation. "We need to go, immediately." They slipped out the back of the cabin, keeping low as they hurried to where the horses were concealed. The animals sensed their tension, ears pricked forward nervously as Tucker and Ruby mounted. "We'll head deeper into the canyon first," Tucker murmured. "Then double back once we're out of sight. With luck, they won't expect that." Ruby nodded, gripping her reins tightly as they urged the horses forward. The first drops of rain began to fall as they wound their way through the narrow passage, the rock walls rising steeply on either side. The sound of the horses' hooves was muffled by the increasingly heavy rainfall, a small mercy that might help conceal their escape. The storm intensified rapidly, rain coming down in sheets that limited visibility to just a few yards ahead. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the treacherous path before them. Thunder boomed, seeming to shake the very canyon walls. "We need to get to higher ground," Tucker shouted over the deluge. "This canyon could flood." Ruby followed as he led them up a steep side trail, the horses struggling for purchase on the rain-slicked rock. They had almost reached the ridge when a bolt of lightning struck a dead tree ahead, sending it crashing down across the path. Ruby's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating her. She managed to keep her seat, but the mare bolted, plunging back down the trail before Ruby could regain control. "Tucker," she cried, fighting to turn the frightened animal. She heard him calling her name, but his voice was lost in another crash of thunder. The mare continued its headlong flight, slipping and sliding down the trail until they reached the canyon floor once more. Only then was Ruby able to bring the animal under control, pulling back firmly on the reins until the horse slowed to a nervous walk. Rain pounded down, soaking Ruby to the skin as she tried to orient herself. The canyon looked different in the storm, unfamiliar and threatening. She had no idea which direction would lead her back to Tucker. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadowy figure on horseback approaching through the rain. Relief surged through her. "Tucker," she called hopefully. But as the rider drew closer, Ruby's relief turned to horror. It wasn't Tucker. The broad-shouldered silhouette belonged to Jenkins, Blackwell's foreman. Ruby wheeled her horse around, spurring the mare into a gallop away from the approaching threat. She heard Jenkins shout behind her, followed by the ominous crack of a revolver. The bullet whined past her ear, far too close for comfort. The canyon narrowed ahead, branching into several smaller passages. Ruby chose one at random, praying it wouldn't lead to a dead end. The rain had turned the canyon floor into a muddy torrent, making progress treacherous. Behind her, she could hear Jenkins in pursuit, his horse's hooves splashing through the gathering water. Another shot rang out, this one striking rock near Ruby's head, sending chips of stone flying. She ducked lower in the saddle, pushing her exhausted mount harder. The passage twisted sharply, then opened onto a broader section of canyon. Ruby's heart sank as she realized she had emerged back into the main canyon and directly into the path of two more riders. She pulled up sharply, looking frantically for an escape route. There was none. Jenkins was behind her, two more of Blackwell's men ahead. She was trapped. "Give it up, girl," Jenkins called, his voice carrying even through the storm. "There's nowhere to go." Ruby's hand moved to the revolver Tucker had given her, but she knew she was outmatched. 3 against 1 and all experienced gunmen. Still, she wouldn't surrender without a fight, not when they were so close to bringing Blackwell to justice. As the men closed in from both directions, Ruby steeled herself for what was to come. If this was to be her last stand, she would make it count. Suddenly, a shot rang out from above, not aimed at Ruby but at Jenkins. The foreman cursed as the bullet struck his shoulder, nearly knocking him from his saddle. The two men ahead hesitated, confused by this new threat. "Ruby, ride for the split rock," Tucker's voice carried from somewhere above. Hope surging through her, Ruby spotted what he meant: a massive boulder split down the middle by some ancient force, creating a narrow passage just wide enough for a horse. She spurred her mare toward it, ducking low as another exchange of gunfire erupted behind her. The split rock opened onto a steep trail leading up the canyon wall. Ruby urged her tired horse upward, the animal struggling against the slope and the mud. Halfway up, she found Tucker waiting, his revolver trained on the canyon below. "Keep going," he instructed tersely. "I'll be right behind you." Ruby wanted to argue, to insist they stay together, but the determination in his eyes brooked no debate. She continued up the trail, glancing back frequently to ensure Tucker was following. At the top of the ridge, the trail leveled out, offering a momentary respite. Ruby reined in, waiting for Tucker to join her. When he did, she noted with alarm the fresh bloodstains spreading across his shirt. "You're wounded again," she said anxiously. Tucker grimaced. "Just reopen the old one, I'll be fine." He looked back the way they had come. "They'll be following." "We need to keep moving." "Where?" "East," Tucker decided. "We'll circle around toward Jerome. The storm will help cover our tracks." They rode through the night, the rain eventually giving way to scattered showers and then clearing entirely, revealing a sky washed clean of clouds. The moon, nearly full now, provided ample light for their journey across the rugged landscape. Tucker set a punishing pace, clearly aware that Blackwell's men would not abandon the pursuit easily. Ruby watched him with growing concern, noting how he sat slightly hunched in the saddle, one hand occasionally pressing against his injured side. "We need to stop," she insisted when they reached a small grove of cottonwoods near dawn. "You're bleeding again and the horses are exhausted." Tucker looked as if he might argue, but then nodded reluctantly. "A short rest," he conceded, "but we're still too close to where they last saw us." They dismounted in the shelter of the trees. Ruby immediately went to check Tucker's wound, insisting he remove his shirt so she could assess the damage. The sight made her heart sink. The previously healing injury had indeed reopened, the skin around it angry and inflamed. "This needs proper care," she said firmly, reaching for their dwindling medical supplies. "Do what you can," Tucker replied grimly, "but be quick about it." Ruby cleaned the wound as best she could with their limited water, then applied more of Maria's healing salve before rebandaging the injury. Throughout the process, Tucker remained stoically silent, though she knew he must be in considerable pain. "There," she said finally, helping him back into his shirt. "It's not ideal, but it should hold for now." Tucker caught her hand as she withdrew, his fingers warm against hers despite everything. "Thank you," he said simply. Ruby met his gaze, struck once more by the intensity she found there. "You've done the same for me," she reminded him. "More than that," Tucker said quietly. "You've given me hope, Ruby. Hope that there's something beyond this endless chase, this life of violence and retribution." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Ruby wasn't sure she fully understood or perhaps was afraid to acknowledge. Before she could respond, Tucker released her hand and stood, his expression shifting back to one of watchful determination. "We should move on. Just a few more hours to reach the foothills near Jerome." Ruby nodded, pushing aside the confusion of emotions his words had stirred. There would be time for such conversations later, after they had reached safety. They rode on as the sun rose, keeping to the shadows of arroyos and ravines where possible. The land was changing subtly, the desert giving way to more varied terrain as they approached the mountains where Jerome perched on its precarious hillside. By mid-morning, they could see the town in the distance, a collection of buildings clinging to the steep mountainside, dominated by the structures of the copper mines that had brought prosperity to the region. "We'll approach from the south," Tucker said, studying the town through narrowed eyes. "Less visible that way. My contact, the telegraph operator, lives on the outskirts." As they drew closer, Ruby felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had come so far, endured so much. If they could just reach Tucker's contact, send the evidence to Judge Harrington, then perhaps this nightmare would finally end. But as they rounded a bend in the trail, Tucker suddenly reined in sharply, raising a hand in warning. Ruby halted beside him, following his gaze to a plume of dust rising from the direction of Jerome. "Riders," Tucker said grimly. "At least 6 of them coming this way." Ruby felt her heart sink. Blackwell's men, most likely. Someone in town must have been watching for us. Tucker scanned the surrounding terrain, looking for options. We need to find cover, quickly. But the land here offered little concealment, scattered brush and low rock formations that wouldn't hide two riders. The nearest substantial cover was a small box canyon about half a mile back the way they had come. The canyon, Tucker decided. It's defensible, at least. They turned their tired horses, pushing the animals to a gallop despite their exhaustion. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger as the pursuing riders spotted them and increased their pace. The canyon entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a horse and rider to pass through. Inside, it opened slightly, with steep walls rising on three sides. It wasn't ideal. There was only one way out, the way they had come in, but it offered protection from gunfire and forced their pursuers to enter one at a time. They dismounted quickly, sending the horses to the back of the canyon where a small seep provided water. Tucker positioned himself near the entrance, revolver ready, while Ruby took up a position slightly behind him with the Winchester. "If things go badly," Tucker said without looking at her, "there's a narrow path at the back of the canyon. It's steep, but you could make it on foot. Get to Jerome, find William Carter at the telegraph office. Tell him I sent you." "I'm not leaving you," Ruby said firmly. Tucker glanced back at her then, his expression softening momentarily. "Ruby, no," she interrupted. "We do this together or not at all. I'm tired of running, Tucker. Tired of Blackwell destroying lives with impunity. If this is where we make our stand, then so be it." For a moment, she thought he might argue. Instead, he nodded once, a mixture of resignation and admiration in his eyes. "Together, then." The pursuing riders had slowed, approaching the canyon entrance with caution. A voice called out Jenkins, his tone gloating despite the wound Ruby knew Tucker had inflicted during the storm. "We know you're in there, Reid. You and the Matthews girl. There's no way out this time." Tucker didn't respond, his attention focused on the narrow entrance where their attackers would have to appear. "Blackwell wants the evidence," Jenkins continued. "Hand it over and maybe he'll let the girl live." "He's lying," Ruby said quietly. "Of course he is," Tucker agreed. "Blackwell can't afford to let either of us live, not with what we know." Jenkins called out again when no response was forthcoming. "Have it your way, Marshal. We've got all day and there's only one way out of that canyon." An uneasy silence fell. Minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying in the confined space of the canyon. Ruby and Tucker remained vigilant, taking turns watching the entrance while conserving their water and ammunition. "They're waiting us out," Tucker said grimly as the afternoon wore on. "Hoping thirst or hunger will force us to surrender." Ruby knew he was right. Their supplies were limited, enough water for perhaps another day, less food than that, and Tucker's wound, though rebandaged, continued to trouble him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the growing pallor of his skin as the hours passed. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Tucker suddenly stiffened, his attention sharpening. "What is it?" Ruby asked, moving to join him at his observation point. "Listen," he murmured. At first, Ruby heard nothing unusual, just the occasional call of a bird, the soft snort of one of their horses. Then she detected a faint but growing rumble like distant thunder. But the sky was clear, the storm long past. Tucker's expression changed, hope lighting his eyes for the first time in hours. "Riders," he said. "A lot of them coming fast." Ruby frowned in confusion. "More of Blackwell's men?" "I don't think so," Tucker replied. "Listen to the pattern, that's a cavalry formation." Before Ruby could respond, a new voice called from outside the canyon, authoritative, commanding, and decidedly not Jenkins. "United States Marshals, throw down your weapons." Tucker let out a breath that was nearly a laugh. "Judge Harrington," he said, relief evident in his voice. "He must have received word of our situation." "But how?" Ruby asked, bewildered. "We never reached your contact in Jerome." "Maria," Tucker realized. "She must have sent word through her own channels." He holstered his revolver and stood calling out, "Marshal Reid, U.S. Marshal's Service." "I have Ruby Matthews with me. We're coming out." "Slowly, Reid," the voice responded. "Hands where we can see them." Tucker and Ruby emerged cautiously from the canyon to find a remarkable scene. At least a dozen men on horseback surrounded the area, all wearing the silver star of U.S. Marshals. Jenkins and his companions were already disarmed and under guard, their expressions a mixture of anger and defeat. An older man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard rode forward to meet them. "Tucker Reid," he said, dismounting. "You look like hell." "Feel about the same, Judge Harrington," Tucker replied with a weary smile, "but considerably better now that you're here." The judge turned to Ruby, his stern features softening slightly. "Miss Matthews, I presume your father was a good man." "His loss was felt by many who value justice in this territory." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ruby replied, touched by the unexpected acknowledgement. "I believe you have evidence that belongs in federal custody," Harrington continued, all business once more. Ruby hesitated, glancing at Tucker. For so long, the satchel had been their responsibility, their burden. Surrendering it now, even to proper authorities, felt strangely momentous. Tucker nodded encouragingly. "It's over, Ruby. The judge will ensure justice is done." With a deep breath, Ruby handed over the satchel containing her father's evidence. Judge Harrington accepted it solemnly. "I've already issued warrants for James Blackwell and his associates," he informed them. "A second detachment of marshals should be taking him into custody as we speak." Relief washed over Ruby, a profound, almost dizzying sensation. After months of grief, days of pursuit, it was finally ending. Her father would have justice at last. Beside her, Tucker swayed slightly on his feet. Ruby turned in alarm, noticing the fresh blood seeping through his shirt. "He's wounded," she told the judge urgently. "He needs a doctor." Harrington barked orders, and soon Tucker was being helped onto a horse, a marshal supporting him from behind. Ruby moved to follow, but Tucker reached out, catching her hand. "Come with me to Tucson," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "After the trial, after all this is over, there are things I need to say to you, things I've wanted to say since that night under the stars." Ruby felt warmth spread through her chest, a tentative happiness beginning to blossom despite the chaos around them. "Yes," she promised, "I'll come." For the first time since she had known him, Tucker Reid smiled, fully a genuine expression that transformed his face, erasing the lines of pain and worry, revealing the man beneath the marshal's stern exterior. As they rode toward Jerome and the medical attention Tucker desperately needed, Ruby felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be a trial, testimony to give, painful memories to confront. But for the first time since her father's death, the future held promise rather than merely survival. And riding beside her, despite his injury, was a man who had risked everything to help her find justice, a man who, somewhere along their dangerous journey, had become something far more important than an ally. The journey to Tucson was long but uneventful. Tucker's wound, though serious, responded well to proper medical treatment, and by the time they reached the territorial capital, he was well on the road to recovery. Ruby stayed by his side throughout, her presence a constant comfort during his healing. Judge Harrington proved as good as his word. James Blackwell was arrested and brought to Tucson in chains, along with Jenkins and several other key members of his organization. The evidence provided by Ruby and Tucker, combined with the judge's own investigation, created an airtight case against the cattle baron. The trial lasted 2 weeks, drawing spectators from across the territory. Ruby testified about her father's innocence, about Blackwell's pursuit and the attempts on her life. Tucker spoke of the broader pattern of intimidation and violence that had characterized Blackwell's rise to power. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, Ruby felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly. Relief that her father's name was cleared at last. but also a strange emptiness, as if the purpose that had driven her for so long had suddenly vanished. On the steps of the courthouse after the sentencing, Tucker found her staring out at the busy streets of Tucson, lost in thought. "It's over," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Your father can rest in peace now." Ruby nodded, unable to find adequate words for the moment. "What happens next?" she asked instead. Tucker hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "For me, there are other cases, other duties. The territory still needs law and order." He glanced at her. "And you, will you return to your father's ranch?" "I suppose so," Ruby replied, though the prospect seemed strangely hollow now. "It's my home, after all." Tucker nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across his features. "Of course. It's a fine property. With your father's name cleared, you should be able to rebuild what Blackwell destroyed." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both seemingly at a loss for how to proceed. The connection that had grown between them during their desperate journey felt suddenly fragile, uncertain in the light of normal life resumed. "Tucker," Ruby began, just as he said, "Ruby, they both stopped, then smiled hesitantly at each other. "Ladies first," Tucker offered. Ruby took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what comes next, about returning to the ranch, picking up where my father left off." She met his eyes directly. "But I've realized something important. The ranch was his dream, not necessarily mine." Tucker's expression was carefully neutral. "What is your dream, Ruby?" "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. "But I know it includes." She faltered, courage momentarily deserting her. Tucker stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Includes what?" "You," Ruby said simply. "If that's something you might want too." The transformation in Tucker's expression was immediate hope replacing uncertainty, warmth banishing reserve. "It's all I've been thinking about," he confessed. "Since that night under the mesquite tree at Maria's, maybe even before, but I didn't want to presume, didn't want you to feel obligated because of what we went through together." Ruby smiled, a weight lifting from her heart. "Not obligation, Tucker, choice. My choice." Tucker reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers with the same care he had shown when tending her wounds in the desert. "I'm not an easy man to love, Ruby Matthews. My job takes me to dangerous places, puts me up against men like Blackwell. It's not the kind of life most women would choose." "I'm not most women," Ruby reminded him. "And I've already seen the worst that life has to offer. I'm not afraid." Tucker's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "No," he agreed softly. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." Then, there on the courthouse steps in full view of anyone who cared to look, United States Marshal Tucker Reid leaned down and kissed Ruby Matthews. It was a tender kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Ruby responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "Come with me," he murmured. "Not just to Tucson or Jerome, but everywhere. Be my partner in every sense of the word." Ruby's heart swelled with joy, with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered. "Wherever you go, I'll be there." The afternoon sun bathed them in golden light as they descended the courthouse steps together, hands still joined, futures irrevocably intertwined. 2 years later, Ruby Reid stood on the porch of a modest home on the outskirts of Prescott, watching as a rider approached in the distance. Though the day was warm, she wore a light shawl draped over her shoulders, concealing the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. The past 2 years had brought changes neither she nor Tucker could have anticipated on that day outside the Tucson courthouse. After Blackwell's conviction, Tucker had been offered a position as Chief Marshal for the Northern Arizona Territory, based in Prescott. The job still involved danger, still took him away from home for days or sometimes weeks at a time, but it provided a stability they both appreciated. Ruby had sold her father's ranch, using part of the proceeds to establish a small foundation that helped families who had been victimized by men like Blackwell rebuild their lives. The work gave her purpose, a way to honor her father's memory while creating something positive from the tragedy of his death. The rider drew closer, and Ruby smiled as she recognized her husband's distinctive silhouette. Tucker had been away for nearly 2 weeks, tracking a band of outlaws who had been terrorizing settlements near the territorial border. From his relaxed posture and the steady pace of his approach, she knew the mission had been successful. As he reached the house, Tucker dismounted with the fluid grace that still made Ruby's heart beat faster. He removed his hat as he approached the porch, revealing hair now streaked with a touch of silver at the temples, a reminder of the dangers he faced, the stress of his responsibilities. "Welcome home, Marshal," Ruby said warmly. Tucker's face broke into the smile he reserved only for her, open, unguarded, full of a love that still amazed her with its intensity. "Mrs. Reid," he replied, climbing the steps to take her in his arms. Their kiss was both familiar and thrilling, a homecoming that never grew routine despite the passage of time. When they parted, Tucker's hand moved instinctively to rest on the swell of her stomach. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his expression softening with concern and wonder. "Wonderful," Ruby assured him. "Dr. Miller says everything is progressing perfectly, though your son has taken to kicking precisely when I'm trying to sleep." Tucker's smile widened. "My son, is it? Last week you were convinced we're having a daughter." Ruby laughed, linking her arm through his as they entered the house together. A mother's intuition changes with the wind, apparently. Inside, Tucker set aside his gun, belt, and hat, symbols of the dangerous world he navigated, and became simply her husband, home from a long journey. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of a couple deeply attuned to each other's rhythms, preparing dinner as they exchanged news and stories from their time apart. Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, they sat on the porch swing, Ruby nestled against Tucker's side as they watched the stars emerge one by one. "Do you ever regret it?" Tucker asked suddenly. "The life you might have had if we'd never met. Running your father's ranch, perhaps married to some respectable rancher, safe from the dangers that come with being a marshal's wife." Ruby considered the question seriously, knowing Tucker deserved an honest answer. "Not for a moment," she said finally. "That life would have been comfortable, perhaps even happy in its way, but it wouldn't have been true to who I am." She turned to look at him, her hand coming up to trace the scar that bisected his eyebrow. "My father used to say that a life without purpose is no life at all. With you, I found my purpose." Tucker caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "As I found mine with you," he murmured. "Before we met, I was just a man with a badge and a gun, fighting an endless battle against men like Blackwell. You gave me something to fight for, something beyond justice for its own sake." Ruby leaned forward to kiss him softly. "We gave that to each other," she corrected. As darkness settled fully over the landscape, bringing with it the cool breath of the desert night, Ruby reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate chase across the Arizona wilderness to the peaceful home they had created together, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen. There would be challenges ahead: Tucker's dangerous profession, the adjustments of parenthood, the ongoing work of building a life together in a territory still wild and unpredictable. But Ruby faced the future without fear, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it as they had faced everything else together. Tucker's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her closer as if he had read her thoughts. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to a love forged in danger and hardship, but sustaining now in peace and hope. "I love you, Ruby Reid," Tucker whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, her voice carrying all the certainty of a woman who had found her true north, her safe harbor in a turbulent world. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the sleeping landscape. Within the circle of Tucker's embrace, Ruby closed her eyes, profoundly grateful for the journey that had led them here to each other, to this moment, to the promise of all the moments yet to come.